Tonight, we're heading to a place that's both familiar and surreal. A town called Quahog, where time stands still, and a talking dog shares a martini with a one-year-old baby genius. Peter's design round belly, white shirt, green pants, and a goofy grin reflects the light-hearted, cartoonish style of Family Guy. From the very first episode in 1999, Peter has been the bumbling patriarch of the Griffin family, often getting into outrageous misadventures. As the series evolved over decades, Peter's character shifted from a dim-witted but well-meaning dad to an almost indestructible reality-bending cartoon persona. Yet through all the absurdity, Peter remains at the comedic heart of the show, a lovable oaf whose antics anchor much of Family Guy's humor. In 1999, television audiences were introduced to a quirky animated family from the fictional town of Quahog. Rhode Island. Family Guy, created by Seth MacFarlane, centers on the Griffin family parents, Peter and Lois, their children Meg, Chris, and Stewie, and the family dog Brian. What set the show apart from the start was its cutaway gag-style rapid, zany flashbacks and side jokes that lampoon American pop culture. But beyond the gag-a-minute surface, Family Guy quietly built up a lore of recurring characters, running jokes, and character backstories that deepened over time. It all started on January 31st, 1999, with the episode Death Has a Shadow. Airing after the Super Bowl, this pilot introduced us to the Griffin family and their world. In these early episodes, Season 1 through 3, the characters were recognizable archetypes, albeit with a twisted MacFarlane flair. Peter Griffin was initially portrayed as a well-intentioned but clumsy blue-collar dad, a rough amalgamation of Homer Simpson's buffoonery and Archie Bunker's crassness. He got into trouble like losing his job after a welfare fraud mishap in the pilot, but usually learned a lesson by episode's end. Back then, Peter's schemes stayed somewhat grounded in reality, and he even showed a conscience or remorse when he messed up. His wife, Lois Griffin, played the voice of reason. In the early days, Lois was the relatively sane anchor of the family, a patient mother and loving wife, albeit with a wry sense of humor and the occasional flash of wild side. Often, she'd snap Peter out of his crazy ideas just in time. Meanwhile, the Griffin kids filled out a classic sitcom lineup with a darkly comic twist. Teen daughter Meg Griffin at first seemed like a typical awkward adolescent, desperate for popularity and struggling with self-esteem. Early episodes gave Meg standard teen plots, dating woes, school dances, painting her as the family's overlooked normal kid in a house of weirdos. Older son Chris Griffin was the goofy, kind-hearted teen boy, a bit dim like his dad but artistically talented, as revealed when he finds he has a knack for painting and the son also draws. In initial seasons, Chris had moments of insight and innocence. For instance, he bonds with a talking evil monkey in his closet, not yet merely a punchline. And then there's Stewie Griffin, the breakout one-year-old character who, from the start, was anything but a typical baby. In 1999, Stewie arrived fully formed as a megalomaniacal genius in Pampers, speaking with a British accent and brandishing sci-fi weapons from his high-tech crib. His quest for world domination and obsessive goal of killing his mother Lois were running subplots in many early episodes. With his foil-shaped head and Rupert the teddy bear at his side, Stewie cracked one-liners like a tiny Bond villain. Viewers were charmed and amused by the absurd sight of an infant plotting murder, a signature of Family Guy's black humor. And we mustn't forget Brian, the family dog, who from the get-go was much more than a pet. Brian walks upright, sips martinis, and speaks with a dry wit and the voice of Seth MacFarlane. Early on, Brian served as the voice of reason in the household, a smoking, talking Labrador retriever who was often the most sensible member of the family. He'd drive the Griffins around town, offer Lois heartfelt advice, and call out Peter's crazy schemes with sarcasm. This dynamic, the dog as the smarty pants among fools, set Family Guy apart and provided endless comedic contrast. By season 2, however, we also learned Brian wasn't perfect. He grappled with a hidden crush on Lois, and even a brief struggle with a cocaine addiction from his police dog days. These flaws made Brian feel more human indeed. He's treated as another person in the show's logic, endearing him to audiences. Quahog itself came to life in the first few episodes, populated with an eclectic supporting cast who would become beloved and bizarre fixtures of the lore. In the very first episode, we meet the Griffin's neighbors. Glenn Quagmire and Cleveland Brown pop up as Peter's drinking buddies. Quagmire, with his frenetic, giggity catchphrase and sex-crazed grin, is established early as the town Lothario, a bachelor constantly on the prowl. Cleveland, by contrast, speaks in a slow drawl and seems easygoing and mild-mannered, often uttering a drawn-out, "Oh, that's nasty." Within Season 1, the show also introduces Joe Swanson, the tough-as-nails police officer who moves in next door with his wife Bonnie and baby on the way. In a memorable debut episode, Joe's wheelchair is initially hidden, and he's revealed as a paraplegic action hero who can still take down criminals despite his disability, instantly flipping expectations and adding a new dynamic to Peter's friend group. The Family Guy world grew quickly. Lois's wealthy parents, Carter and Barbara Pewterschmidt, are revealed by Season 2, anchoring an upper-crust side of the family lore. And even the local tavern, the Drunken Clam, with its unlucky bartender Horace, is established as the gang's hangout. Quahog's TV news anchors, Tom Tucker and Diane Simmons, also become recurring characters delivering absurd news bulletins that often intersect with the Griffin family's antics. In these early years, Family Guy didn't focus on long story arcs or serialized plots. It was mostly episodic chaos. Yet seeds of lore were planted. For example, baby Stewie's age is officially marked when he celebrates his first birthday in the Season 1 finale, Chitty Chitty Death Bang, confirming that this pernicious infant is 1 year old, and ironically, that episode hints he might be Satan's spawn, a joke that just scratches the surface of Stewie's surreal character. A running gag begins where Stewie repeatedly tries, and comically fails, to assassinate Lois, using gadgets like mind control devices and ray guns, a thread that would continue for years. We also see the first chicken fight in the Season 2 episode Da Boom. Peter's brief argument with a man-sized chicken named Ernie explodes into an absurd, extended brawl across the city, establishing a famous recurring joke that will resurface in ever-escalating form. These little callbacks and world-building moments gradually accumulated even as the show's status was about to face turmoil. By 2002, Family Guy had aired 3 seasons of irreverent comedy, gained a cult following of fans who loved its edgy jokes and pop culture riffs, and also weathered some controversy. Fox network censors and executives were sometimes uneasy with the show's boundary-pushing content. One infamous episode, When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, which satirized Jewish stereotypes and featured Peter singing a song called I Need a Jew, was produced in Season 3, but Fox initially refused to air it on TV. It eventually premiered on Adult Swim in 2003, illustrating how Family Guy was unafraid to provoke. Despite its growing fan base, Family Guy struggled in the Nielsen ratings in those early years, and Fox moved it around the schedule erratically. This led to a major turning point that would itself become Family Guy legend: the cancellation and miraculous revival. In 2002, after Season 3, Fox officially canceled Family Guy. The final episode of the original run, Road to Europe, aside from one episode later burned off on Adult Swim, aired in February 2002. It seemed like the Griffins' chaotic adventures had met an untimely end. The network's decision wasn't too surprising on paper. Ratings were modest, and the show had stirred some advertiser-unfriendly waters. But fans were heartbroken. Yet, in a twist that could have come from one of the show's own plot lines, Family Guy got a second lease on life thanks to its fans. Reruns on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim late-night block became hugely popular in 2003, and the Season 1 and 2 DVD sets sold like hotcakes, finding a growing audience who binged the Griffin family's antics over and over. This passionate cult following and the unexpectedly massive DVD sales convinced Fox that perhaps Quahog's dysfunctional family was worth another shot. By 2004, the network reversed course and announced Family Guy would return. This revival was unprecedented at the time, a show canceled for years being resurrected due to fan demand. It's often cited that Family Guy's revival was one of the first driven by DVD popularity and online buzz, paving the way for other shows to be saved by their fan bases. Behind the scenes during the hiatus, Seth MacFarlane had kept busy developing a new animated comedy. American Dad premiered in early 2005, but he was more than eager to jump back into the Griffin family's world once Fox gave the green light. The The writers even cheekily referenced the cancellation after returning. In the season 4 premiere, there's a joke listing all the failed Fox shows that aired since Family Guy was off the air, poking fun at the network's impatience. When Family Guy returned in May 2005 with season 4, it picked up right where it left off, as if no time had passed in Quahog. The Griffins were back, and early in the revival, the show carried forward many of the threads from season 3. For instance, one of the first new episodes, Peter's Got Woods, 2005, has Brian still dating a woman named Jillian. He meets the sweet but dim Jillian in Whistle While Your Wife Works, shortly after the revival. This began a notable story arc for Brian, dating Jillian, a much younger and not very bright woman, which becomes a recurring subplot through season 5. Brian's often tumultuous love life is a running element of the lore. With Jillian, he experiences an earnest but comically mismatched relationship, Brian being intellectual and pretentious, Jillian being naive and bubbly. They remain together for a while, an unusually long continuity for a Family Guy subplot, until 2007 when Jillian finally breaks up with Brian in Movin' Out, Brian's song, ending their 2-year relationship on amicable terms. The post-revival era, 2005 to 2007, saw Family Guy expand its world and up the ante in terms of humor and storytelling. The writers, now assured of the show's popularity, felt free to push boundaries even further. Cutaway gags grew even more elaborate and referential. One famous episode, PTV, 2005, satirized TV censorship by having Peter start his own raunchy television network, a response to the real-world FCC crackdown after the Janet Jackson Super Bowl incident. The episode gleefully mocks censorship and even features a catchy song, The Freakin' FCC, showcasing the show's willingness to challenge norms. It also highlighted how Family Guy had grown confident enough to comment on its own controversies with sharp satire. During this period, each Griffin family member's character began to evolve in new directions. Little Stewie, for instance, started to show more facets beyond being a matricidal maniac. In the season 5 premiere, Stewie Loves Lois, 2006, Stewie undergoes a temporary change of heart, becoming utterly affectionate towards Lois after she helps repair his beloved teddy bear Rupert. This episode is played for laughs. Stewie turns into a clingy mama's boy, smothering a baffled Lois with love. But it subtly marks the show acknowledging Stewie's one-note evil baby shtick might wear thin. Indeed, the producers have openly discussed that as Stewie became the breakout star, they needed to develop his personality beyond the kill Lois jokes. Over time, Stewie's world domination plans and homicidal tendencies were toned down, and more attention was paid to his ambiguous sexuality, his insecurities, and his friendship with Brian. This evolution was gradual, but by the late 2000s, viewers could see Stewie transitioning from supervillain in the crib to a more complex, whimsical character, still very much a weird genius baby, but with a softer side peeking through. An early hint of this is Stewie's relationship with Brian deepening, episodes like Road to Rhode Island, 2000, and later the series of Road to Adventure episodes, a loving homage to old Bing Crosby, Bob Hope road films, pair Stewie and Brian on wild trips, strengthening their odd couple friendship through musical numbers and heartfelt moments. On the opposite end, Meg Griffin's role in the family was notably shifting too, and not for the better, at least in universe. The writers gradually found dark comedy gold in making Meg the perpetual punching bag of the family. By season 4 and 5, jokes about everyone from Peter to Brian mercilessly insulting Meg, often a cruel "shut up, Meg" from Peter, became more frequent. This was a conscious change. The show's team admitted they had trouble writing typical teen girl plots and instead started using Meg as a foil for edgy jokes. For example, an episode in 2005 has Peter replacing Meg's name on her birth certificate with Megatron, purely to tease her. As mean as it was, fans came to anticipate the outrageous ways the family would ignore or ridicule Meg. Yet, Meg's character wasn't entirely static. Occasionally, episodes would push her to a breaking point, as in Dial Meg for Murder, 2010, when she briefly becomes a hardened delinquent after a stint in jail. These instances gave Meg a chance to confront her family's mistreatment, adding a pinch of emotional reality to the otherwise absurd dynamic. Still, through the late 2000s, poor Meg remains the unloved middle child in most stories, a running gag that, while harsh, became a core part of Family Guy's identity. Meanwhile, Patriarch Peter was undergoing the opposite trajectory. Far from learning lessons anymore, Peter Griffin was losing IQ points and gaining cartoonish invincibility as the seasons progressed. By season 5 and 6, Peter could drive through a house in his car, survive explosions, fight a giant chicken for minutes on end, and emerge with only a few scratches, all played for slapstick comedy. The show leaned into the notion that Peter is essentially a big kid with no impulse control. He'd take on crazy schemes each week, forming a Peter-copter helicopter in his backyard, only to immediately crash it, or deciding to become transitorily gay, after a medical experiment in Family Gay 2009, before returning to straight family life or dressing in drag to use a women's restroom. The rules of reality bent further around Peter, often with him breaking the fourth wall or displaying meta-awareness that he's a cartoon character. This escalation made Peter more distinct from his early Homer Simpson-like roots. By the 2010s, Peter is essentially a live-action Looney Tune, a Deadpool-esque ability to do anything he wants without fear of harm or consequence, as one commentator put it. This change set the stage for ever more outlandish Peter-centric plotlines, from becoming an accidental country music star to befriending aliens. And while it made Peter more absurd, it also opened the comedy floodgates. There was nothing Peter couldn't do for a laugh, logic be damned. The supporting cast also grew in complexity after the show's return. Quagmire, for example, got fleshed out beyond his one-note sex jokes, though those certainly continued in spades. In later seasons, we learn Quagmire's background. He's a former Navy pilot, speaks multiple languages, and despite his perversions, he has a sharp intellect. By highlighting these traits, the show ironically made Quagmire one of the more competent characters, even as his sexual crudeness reached new extremes, to the point where Family Guy outright acknowledges him as a sex addict or full-blown sex criminal in later jokes. A pivotal Quagmire episode in 2010, Quagmire's dad, has his father undergo gender confirmation surgery to become Ida, providing a surprisingly earnest, if still joke-laden, look at Quagmire's capacity for empathy and growth. And in Jerome is the New Black, 2009, Quagmire's simmering hatred for Brian is revealed. He delivers a scathing monologue listing Brian's flaws, calling him out for being a smug, pretentious drunk, among other things. This established a rivalry between Quagmire and Brian that becomes a recurring undercurrent of the lore. In various episodes afterward, the two often bicker or try to one-up each other. And Quagmire's disdain for Brian's hypocritical morals is a rare case of the show critiquing one of its main characters from within. Not only did this create an interesting dynamic, it also mirrored some fans' feelings that Brian had become more of a jerk over time. As for Cleveland Brown, the soft-spoken neighbor with the gentle demeanor, his life took a big turn in the late 2000s. In season 4, Cleveland endured a tough personal arc when his wife Loretta cheated on him and left, in a storyline that provided both drama and comedy, culminating in Quagmire being the other man. This left Cleveland a sad divorcee, but not for long. In 2009, Cleveland was spun off into his own series, The Cleveland Show, which meant he actually moved away from Quahog. The in-universe explanation: Cleveland decides to start fresh and moves to Stool Bend, Virginia, taking his son Cleveland Jr. with him. On Family Guy, there's a brief farewell scene, played humorously, where Peter watches Cleveland drive off and quips about him getting his own show. During Cleveland's absence, 2009 to 2013, his spot in the Quahog gang is effectively filled by a new drinking buddy, Jerome, who is introduced as a bartender at the Drunken Clam. Jerome even briefly dates Lois in one episode, causing some friction, but generally he slides into the friend group without too much issue. Notably, Jerome is one of the few black characters on Family Guy, and the show sometimes uses him to jokingly address the fact that Peter's circle was lacking diversity after Cleveland left. Cleveland's departure was a significant lore change. He was one of Peter's original trio of pals now gone. But Family Guy continued on, occasionally referencing his new life in Virginia. Loretta, Cleveland's ex, met a darkly comic end during this period. In a crossover episode of The Cleveland Show, Loretta dies in an accident, falling out of a bathtub lifted by a tornado, true to the cartoon absurdity. Cleveland thus returns to Quahog a widower at one point for her funeral, marking an intersection of the two shows' stories. Speaking of character deaths, the late 2000s into 2010 saw Family Guy willing to shake up its roster in ways fans didn't expect from a normally reset-heavy sitcom. The season 8, or 9 by Fox's numbering, premiere in 2010 was an hour-long special titled "And Then There Were Fewer." This episode was a full-fledged murder mystery that brought many Quahog residents together in a remote mansion and picked them off one by one in Agatha Christie fashion. By the end of the episode, several supporting characters were killed off for good. News anchor Diane Simmons turns out to be the murderer and is shot by Stewie. Muriel Goldman, the pharmacist's wife, is stabbed. And even James Woods, playing a fictionalized version of himself, is ostensibly killed. This was a dramatic shift. Up to then, even when wild stuff happened, the show generally didn't have lasting consequences. And Then There Were Fewer was notable not only for its impressive cinematic animation. It was the first episode produced in HD, which made the dark, stormy night setting look great, but also for signaling that Family Guy had an evolving canon. Characters like Diane and Muriel, who had been around since early seasons, were now gone from the series' ongoing storyline. The Family Guy team even confirmed in interviews that those deaths were permanent, a bit of house cleaning of side characters, albeit done with a wink and a lot of blood. Fans were surprised that even in a show where logic is loose, the events of that episode stuck. The Quahog news desk soon got a new anchor, Joyce Kinney, to replace Diane, reflecting the in-story change. These kinds of shakeups kept the lore from becoming stagnant and added a small sense of stakes to certain events. Of course, Family Guy would still often magically reset things when convenient, but now viewers knew that sometimes changes were real. By 2010, Family Guy was in full stride, mixing outrageous humor with occasional continuity. The show celebrated its 150th episode in 2010 with Brian and Stewie, a notable two-character bottle episode that locked the duo in a bank vault for the entire half hour. This quiet, play-like episode had virtually no cutaways or secondary plots, a bold departure, and featured Brian and Stewie having deep and at times emotional conversations. They confront issues like Brian's depressive tendencies, including a contemplation of suicide, and Stewie's dependence on Brian as a friend. In a touching moment, both admit how much they mean to one another, with Stewie tearfully telling Brian, "You're the only person I trust." It's an example of Family Guy momentarily dropping its sarcastic guard to explore the relationships between its characters. In the end, they hug it out, after some gross-out humor involving a dirty diaper, naturally. For a show often seen as irreverent and shallow, Brian and Stewie proved it could deliver emotional depth when it wanted to. As one of the milestones, it cemented the idea that the Brian-Stewie friendship is essentially the heart of the series, a strange, interspecies bond that has given the show some of its sweetest and most poignant scenes over the years. Moving into the early 2000s and 10s, Family Guy continued to enjoy high ratings and cultural relevance. The humor remained edgy as ever, with episodes tackling topics like religion, politics, and social media in the show's typically un-PC fashion. For instance, the 2011 episode Road to the North Pole was a dark Christmas special that showed a decrepit dystopian workshop, a far cry from Jolly Holiday Fare, yet it won an Emmy for its ambitious musical numbers and animation. The series wasn't afraid to court controversy. In 2010, Fox actually declined to air Partial Terms of Endearment, an episode about Lois considering an abortion due to its sensitive subject matter. It was released on DVD instead. This era showed Family Guy walking that fine line between provocative satire and network television limits. And yet, within the writer's room, they kept expanding the lore and playing with the show's format. One significant development was the increasing number of meta episodes that reflected on the show itself or experimented with storytelling structure. A great example is the Season 10 episode Back to the Pilot, 2011, where Brian and Stewie use a time machine to travel back to the very first episode of Family Guy. They insert themselves into scenes from the 1999 pilot, resulting in a mind-bending and fourth-wall-breaking adventure that delighted longtime fans. Eagle-eyed viewers could catch differences in the animation and jokes, highlighting how the show had changed. Another, Road to the Multiverse, 2009, just edging into this era, had Brian and Stewie hopping between alternate universes, including one styled like Disney animation and another like a post-apocalyptic Mad Max world, showcasing the series' creativity and also winking at its own pop culture influences. By doing episodes like these, Family Guy enriched its lore by implying a sort of multi-dimensional continuity. There are many wild versions of the Griffins out there, but in our timeline, certain key events remain constant. In terms of character arcs, by 2012 the Griffin family had subtly but noticeably changed from their late 90s selves. Chris Griffin, who started as a simple teen with a love of drawing and a fear of the evil monkey in his closet, had been Flanderized to an extent. He was now often portrayed as dumber, occasionally shockingly dumb, and more awkward than before. The show dropped most threads of Chris having unique talents or rebellion. Gone were the days of him being a skilled artist or momentarily channeling Mr. T as an imaginary friend. Instead, Chris became a reliable source of pubescent humor, his voice crack, his clueless observations, and his occasional dips into creepy territory, like an attraction to his substitute teacher, or in one gag, an implication he might become a sociopath, provided laughs. Still, Chris occasionally got spotlight episodes such as German Guy, 2011, where he befriends an elderly puppeteer who turns out to be a Nazi in hiding. A bizarre plot that nonetheless gave Chris some agency for once, and he ultimately helps bring the man to justice. And remember that evil monkey? In a fun Season 7 twist, Chris finally points out the monkey to his family in Hannah Banana, 2009, and discovers the creature isn't evil at all. It was simply misunderstood and anxious. After clearing up the misunderstanding, the now friendly monkey moves out of Chris's closet, ending that long-running gag on a humorous note. Little continuity nods like this rewarded loyal viewers and wrapped up a minor piece of lore that had persisted since early seasons. Lois, on the other hand, became less of a straight-laced mom as the years went by. By the 2010s, she's often just as zany as the rest of the family. While she still is usually the voice of reason, Lois now has plenty of episodes highlighting her own flaws and desires, from a gambling addiction to a midlife crisis where she gets obsessed with youth culture to moments of doubt about her marriage. A memorable two-part story from late 2007, Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie, explored an extreme scenario where Stewie apparently succeeds in murdering Lois and taking over the world, only for Lois to return and kill Stewie in revenge. That story arc turned out to be a computer simulation in Stewie's mind, a classic Dallas style, it was all a dream trick. But it was significant because it allowed the show to play out a what-if where Lois goes full action hero. By the end of it, Lois proves formidable enough to beat Stewie in a fight. Though non-canon, those episodes acknowledged what fans know. Lois is not a woman to be underestimated. In general, as the show progressed, Lois's edginess increased. She could crack filthy jokes, indulge in cutaway gags where she's as morally questionable as Peter, and even openly acknowledge how dysfunctional her family is. In one episode, Lois remarks on how terrible their lives truly are, only to continue about her day. This evolution kept Lois relevant and funny, moving her beyond the typical nagging TV mom. By 2012, she's arguably one of the more sane Griffins, but that's a low bar when Peter's practically a cartoon superhero and Stewie's building time machines in the garage. Now, perhaps the most jaw-dropping moment of Family Guy's lore occurred in late 2013. In the Season 12 episode Life of Brian, the writers took the bold step of killing off Brian Griffin. Yes, the family dog, voice of reason, and one of the show's most beloved characters. In the episode, Brian is tragically hit by a car in a scene that was played seriously, without a comedic punchline. The Griffins mourn tearfully at his bedside as Brian says goodbye. It was a genuinely emotional and shocking turn. Within the story, Brian's death was permanent enough that the family went out and got a new dog, Vinny, in the same episode. Vinny, voiced with a thick Italian-American accent, was a stark contrast to Brian, a streetwise, less educated dog, and he sticks around as the Griffin pet for a couple of episodes. The real-world reaction to Brian's death was intense. Fans were not okay with losing Brian. There was widespread media coverage and an outcry on social media and forums as viewers expressed grief and even anger at the show for such a move. It says something about how real these characters had become to fans that the death of an animated dog sparked online petitions and trending hashtags. Of course, Family Guy had a twist in store. Just 2 episodes later, in Christmas Guy, Stewie manages to travel back in time and prevent Brian's accident, bringing Brian back to life and restoring the status quo. The show essentially hit the undo button, and Brian rejoined the family as if nothing happened, with only a passing meta joke or two afterwards about the whole ordeal. The temporary death arc ultimately lasted just a few weeks in late 2013, but it left a mark on the show's lore and its audience. For one, it cemented Brian's importance. The massive fan response demonstrated that Family Guy without Brian simply didn't feel right, much as the writers might have been experimenting. Within the narrative, it also added another layer to Stewie and Brian's bond. Stewie was utterly devastated by Brian's loss, motivating him to do anything, even risk destroying the space-time continuum, to save his best friend. When Stewie succeeds, the embrace and joyful tears he and Brian share felt genuinely heartwarming for viewers. In a strange way, Brian's death and return was one of Family Guy's most emotionally resonant storylines, despite being a temporary sci-fi-driven plot. And interestingly, it proved that Family Guy could still generate headlines and surprise the audience deep into its run. This series, often dismissed as simply a gag machine, showed it was willing to take narrative risks and could pull on the heartstrings when it wanted to. After Brian's resurrection, an in-universe Christmas miracle, the Griffin family was whole once more, and fans breathed a sigh of relief. With the core family intact and entering the mid-2010s, Family Guy forged ahead, now well into the double-digit seasons. By this point, the show had little left to prove. It was a staple of Fox's lineup, often paired on Sunday nights with its once rival, The Simpsons, and it confidently experimented with format and story. One notable event in 2014 was the much-publicized crossover, The Simpsons Guy. This hour-long episode saw the Griffin family travel to Springfield and meet the Simpsons, marking a historic collision of 2 animated worlds. The episode was filled with meta-humor about the similarities and differences between the shows. Fans were treated to scenes like Homer Simpson and Peter Griffin guzzling beers together and eventually getting into an over-the-top brawl in classic chicken fight style that parodies debates over which show is better. The Simpsons Guy was both absurd and oddly satisfying. It acknowledged Family Guy's debt to The Simpsons while also highlighting Family Guy's distinctively more adult and surreal comedic voice. For lore enthusiasts, the crossover wasn't exactly canon for either show's continuity, but it was a fun what-if that demonstrated Quahog's universe could collide with others. Interestingly, in the Family Guy internal lore, characters from other shows sometimes exist as themselves, e.g., the Griffin family has watched The Simpsons on TV or referenced it as a cartoon. The crossover blurred that line for a one-off special. Back in Quahog, 2014 was also the year that Cleveland Brown returned to Family Guy. After 4 seasons, the Cleveland show was canceled, and so Cleveland and his new family, wife Donna and stepchildren Roberta and Rallo, plus his now chubbier teen son Cleveland Jr., moved back to their old house on Spooner Street. In the episode He's Blah Ack, 2014, Cleveland's re-entrance is celebrated, though not without comic friction. Lois and Donna argue about parenting, temporarily straining Peter and Cleveland's renewed friendship. Eventually, the status quo is restored. Cleveland reclaims his seat at the Clam with Peter, Joe, and Quagmire. His time in Virginia isn't forgotten. The characters occasionally joke about Cleveland's spin-off as if it were a life event. But from this point on, Cleveland is firmly a main cast member of Family Guy again. Interestingly, Cleveland comes back a slightly changed man. He's a bit more outspoken than before his spin-off, where he had to carry a show after all. Family Guy even incorporates some of the personality developed on the Cleveland show, giving him more energy and involvement in plots than the pre-2009 Cleveland had. And yes, they brought back his signature bathtub gag. One of his first episodes back has Peter inadvertently destroying Cleveland's upstairs bath yet again, sending Cleveland tumbling in a torrent of water as he yells his trademark, "No, no, no, no!" With Cleveland's return, the original four Guy friends, Peter, Quagmire, Joe, Cleveland, were finally reunited, and Family Guy played that up in subsequent seasons. We see more storylines focused on the group's dynamic. For instance, Big Trouble in Little Quahog, 2018, shrinks the four friends to microscopic size for a sci-fi adventure, emphasizing how their camaraderie endures even in the weirdest situations. Joe Swanson, for his part, continued to be a reliable source of both humor and occasional pathos. After many years as a hyper-competent hero cop in a wheelchair, Joe's characterization gradually tilted more toward him being pitiable or bizarre for comedic effect. Jokes about Joe's disability became more frequent, sometimes a bit shockingly so, such as Peter casually knocking Joe out of his wheelchair or Joe's limbs falling off in slapstick fashion. The show also explored Joe's depression over his paralysis in a darker way. In Internal Affairs, 2012, Joe's marital troubles with Bonnie, who had been eternally pregnant from seasons 1 through 7 and finally had baby Susie in 2008, come to a head, and the two separate for a time. While usually Family Guy minds Joe for gags, episodes like that remind us he's one of the more grounded characters emotionally. He feels real pain. There was also an earlier episode, Believe It or Not, Joe's Walking on Air, 2007, where Joe briefly gains the ability to walk after leg surgery, only to become arrogant and alienate his friends. In the end, he asks to be paralyzed again, in a typically outrageous resolution, to save his marriage and friendships. All these stories, silly as they are, contribute to Joe's lore. He evolves from the cliché super cripple trope to a more flawed human character who sometimes hates his situation and sometimes overcomes it. By 2017, Joe's become a bit of an oddball. He has quirks like a love for the candy bar mounds and a habit of using flashcards to aid conversation, but he's still the loyal friend who will roll into danger for Peter and the gang. Another beloved figure who underwent changes in this era was Mayor Adam West. Voiced by the real Adam West, of Batman 60s fame, Quahog's mayor was a constant source of absurd humor from the early seasons through 2017. Mayor West was portrayed as utterly eccentric, chasing imaginary villains, enacting nonsensical laws, and displaying childlike randomness, like digging through the city's supply of tainted watermelons or marrying his own hand. Tragically, the actor Adam West passed away in 2017. Rather than immediately address it in-show, Family Guy allowed the character to quietly fade out after his pre-recorded episodes aired. In 2019, they paid a touching tribute. In the episode Adam West High, Brian suggests renaming Quahog's high school to Adam West High in honor of the departed mayor, and the town agrees. It was a sweet in-universe way to memorialize both the character and the actor. By 2020, the show finally decided Quahog needed a new mayor. They brought on Sam Elliott to voice Mayor West's cousin, Wild West, an equally quirky yet mustachioed cowboy figure, as the new town mayor. This transition was handled with care, acknowledging that Adam West was irreplaceable, but life in Quahog goes on. It added a new face to the supporting cast without erasing what came before. In a larger sense, moments like these show Family Guy's age. It had been on long enough to lose a character due to an actor's passing, much like The Simpsons had with some of its characters. The lore now carries the memory of Mayor West, immortalized by a school name and fond mentions. Between 2015 and 2017, Family Guy hit its 250th and 300th episodes, incredible milestones that the show marked with What Else? Creative episodes. The 2,000-Year-Old Virgin, 2015, humorously imagined Jesus as a character who befriends Peter, revealing he's stayed a virgin for millennia and wants some help breaking the streak, a plot that raised a few eyebrows. For the 300th episode in 2018, they went a different route. Send in Stewie, please. This Stewie-centric episode is almost a one-act play in which Stewie visits a child psychologist, voiced by Sir Ian McKellen, and has a long, soul-bearing conversation. In a quiet office setting, Stewie drops his fake British accent and speaks in his real voice, confessing deep fears and uncertainties about himself, including his questions about his sexuality and why he feels the need to hide his true self behind a flamboyant persona. It's an astonishing bit of character work that strips away the usual rapid-fire jokes. The episode ends with a twist. The therapist dies of a heart attack, and thus all of Stewie's admissions remain secret, maintaining the status quo. But for viewers, the insight was already given. Stewie Griffin, the evil baby of yore, is now a far more nuanced character, a child grappling with identity and loneliness. During this mid-2000s teens period, Family Guy also had fun acknowledging its own legacy. The episode Family Guy Through the Years, 2018, pretends to be a documentary that imagines the Griffins as if Family Guy had been on since the 1950s, replete with retro animation styles for each decade of the show. It's a surreal, fourth-wall-breaking journey that lovingly parodies the evolution of TV sitcoms, and by extension, highlights how Family Guy itself has transformed. By framing it as if Peter and Lois had been on TV raising their family for 60-plus years, the episode winks at the audience about the show's longevity and shifting cultural sensibilities. For example, the 1970s segment presents a very all-in-the-family-style Griffin family dealing with social issues, while the 90s segment shows an extreme Full House saccharine version. These playful excursions reinforce that Family Guy has become self-aware of its place in pop culture. It has a history now, one rich enough to spoof. The later 2010s also saw the show respond to real-world social changes in its production. In 2020, amid industry-wide reflection on representation, voice actor Mike Henry decided to step down from voicing Cleveland Brown, an African-American character he had portrayed since the start. Mike Henry, who is white, publicly stated that persons of color should play characters of color. The show's producers respected this move and cast Arif Zahir, a black voice actor and YouTuber known for doing spot-on impressions of Cleveland, to assume the role from season 19 onward. This behind-the-scenes change is part of Family Guy's lore too, in a meta sense. It reflects the show's adaptation to the times and its effort to course-correct in areas of representation. Notably, the character Cleveland remains the same in universe. Zahir mimics the voice closely, and Cleveland's personality is unchanged, but knowing about the casting change adds an extra layer when watching post-2020 episodes. Similarly, the character of Consuela, the Latina maid who recurred as a gag character, stopped being voiced by Mike Henry for the same reasons around that time. These shifts show that even an old dog like Family Guy can learn new tricks, updating its practices while still delivering the familiar comedy fans expect. As we settle into the cozy present, Family Guy sails on, one of the longest-running scripted shows on television. By 2019, the series celebrated its 20th anniversary, an incredible feat that only a few animated shows, like The Simpsons and South Park, have achieved. The lore we've discussed now spans over 400 episodes. Think about that. 400 installments of Griffin family shenanigans, each adding a brushstroke to this extensive, absurd tapestry of a timeline. The show hasn't adhered to a strict continuity. Characters don't visibly age in real time, and reset buttons are frequent. Yet a dedicated viewer can trace a clear evolution in the characters and the world from 1999 to 2025. There's a comforting rhythm to Family Guy now, much like a long-running comic strip. It has its established beats and catchphrases, and fans tune in as much for the familiarity as for the surprises. In recent seasons, 2020 to 2025, Family Guy has kept up with modern times in its own irreverent way. Episodes lampoon internet culture, such as the spread of misinformation on social media in The Miseducation of Lisa Simpson. Just kidding. Simpsons did that. Family Guy might tackle it with Peter believing crazy conspiracy videos instead. Quahog and its residents also sometimes mirror current events. For example, the show acknowledged the COVID-19 pandemic in 2021, with comedic asides about mask wearing and lockdown boredom. Though, true to form, Family Guy didn't do a heavy pandemic episode, opting to keep the escapism mostly intact. Character-wise, the Griffin family is largely steady by this era. They've settled into their roles, albeit heightened to comic extremes. Meg, for instance, occasionally gets a victory or a moment of respect, like in the episode Better Off Meg, where the family thinks she's dead and realizes, too late, they did care about her. But mostly, Meg's misfortunes remain a running joke, something even she has come to accept with eye-rolling resignation, which, in a strange way, has made her a stronger personality. Stewie, post-therapy, continues to be a lovable wild card. One episode in 2020, Stewie's first word, even has him finally utter a clear word in front of the church congregation. Unfortunately, that word is a loud F-bomb. This causes a town scandal and Lois to question her parenting, but interestingly, none of the family seems surprised that Stewie can talk. It's more a shock what he said. Moments like these play with the long-running ambiguity of who understands Stewie. Brian in recent seasons has undergone a bit of a renaissance, recovering some of his likability after a stretch where he was often portrayed as a pretentious jerk. The show started poking fun at 2010's Brian by humbling him in various ways. For example, an episode has Brian become Twitter famous only to get canceled for an insensitive tweet, the D in Apartment 23, 2017, forcing him to confront his own self-righteous behavior. He's had romances with a woman named Jess who sadly dies in a dark parody of The Fault in Our Stars, and continued his fruitless pursuit of writing glory. By 2022, Brian remains the anthropomorphic soul of the family, prone to delusions of grandeur and embarrassing failures, yet ultimately loyal and loving, especially towards Stewie. The two even got a special sequel to their road adventures with Road to Maine in Season 20, proving their dynamic is evergreen. The town of Quahog still thrives as a backdrop. Quahog's local residents, like Dr. Hartman the Quack Doctor, Seamus the wooden-armed sea captain, Bruce the always-marrying wedding officiant, who finally came out and got engaged to his boyfriend in 2020, and Trisha Takanawa the news reporter, appear when needed, contributing to that sense of a consistent community. Even long-gone characters sometimes reappear in cutaway gags or fantasy sequences, because on Family Guy, no one is ever truly gone from the comedy repertoire. Even Diane Simmons popped up as a devil in a gag post-death. In terms of major recent arcs or changes, Family Guy hasn't thrown any Brian Dies curveballs at us lately. Instead, it's settled into being a reliable comedy that occasionally pushes its own boundaries stylistically. One example is the Season 19 episode Terminator 2021, which spoofs Terminator with an action-heavy plot of future Peter sending a robot to kill present Peter. Another is Three Directors 2017, which retells a simple story, Peter getting fired from his job, in 3 different directing styles, a la Quentin Tarantino, Wes Anderson, and Michael Bay. These creative outings keep the show fresh and give longtime viewers something novel amid the familiar. They also add to lore in only a meta-sense, showing the characters in alternate genres or realities, expanding how we can see them. Family Guy's show development story, that is the real-world saga, is now a legend of its own. A show that was canceled, reborn, nearly killed a main character, crossed over with The Simpsons, spun off a neighbor, survived cast changes, and outlived many of its contemporaries. In April 2025, Fox went so far as to renew Family Guy for an additional 4 seasons, extending its production well into the late 2020s. This means the Griffins are on track to continue their misadventures and likely hit the 25-year mark and beyond on air. It's wild to consider that Stewie Griffin, forever a 1-year-old in the show, would be in his mid-20s by now, had he aged normally. That perpetual babyhood is part of the joke, of course. The characters are essentially ageless icons at this point, akin to comic strip characters like Charlie Brown or Garfield, yet they have undeniably transformed in personality and circumstances over time, as we've chronicled. So where does that leave the lore of Family Guy today? In a cozy place, one might say. The show has amassed an encyclopedia of callbacks and inside jokes. Peter's endless jobs and cutaway personas, remember Petardia, or Peter as a member of KISS, Stewie and Brian's time travel exploits, Meg's many short-lived boyfriends and stalkers, Quagmire's scandalous escapades, and occasional moments of heroism, like adopting cats or saving the day during a Wi-Fi outage, and countless celebrity parodies. The longer you stick with Family Guy, the more these running gags feel like old friends. You might chuckle when the giant chicken appears for a surprise fight, or when the evil monkey is referenced, or when Chris's boss, Mr. Herbert, the elderly man with a creepy crush on him, sings a warbling tune. Not because it's shocking, but because you've been in on the joke for so long. It's almost comforting in its absurdity. At the same time, Family Guy retains the ability to catch us off guard, with a particularly sharp satire, a sudden heartfelt line, or an outrageous plot turn. Its surreal but cozy tone means you can never be too sure if the next scene will be a tender family moment or a cutaway to, say, Peter dancing with ghosts. This balance of the emotionally familiar and the comically unpredictable is what keeps viewers engaged and able to relax to it, even fall asleep to it, as the YouTube lo-fi crowd might attest. There's something almost lullaby-like about hearing the Griffin family bicker and quip. You know them so well by now. It's like listening to humorous family anecdotes told by beloved relatives. As we close this extensive chronicle, picture the Griffin family gathered on their living room couch, as they are in the endearingly simple opening credits, to the tune of their show tune theme song. Peter cracks a bad joke. Lois sighs with a half smile. Brian sips a drink while reading a book. Chris plays a video game. Meg scrolls on her phone, rolling her eyes. And Stewie, perhaps sitting in Brian's lap, quietly plots something diabolical with a mischievous glint in his eye. It's a scene of chaotic harmony that could only be the Griffins. Over the years, we've seen them travel through time, conquer multiverses, and lampoon every trope under the sun. But at their core, they remain a family, a hilariously dysfunctional, yet strangely loving family. In Family Guy's very first episode, Brian raises a martini and toasts to the Griffin family. After all these seasons, that toast still feels apt. Through cancellations and comebacks, crazy cutaways and heartfelt confessions, the Griffin family endures, inviting us into their surreal world and, in doing so, becoming a small part of ours. Here's to the Griffins, and to many more cozy, comical nights in Quahog to come.